You've just given an editorial on saying that there's nothing. You actually make the same point, actually, in a different way in your column. So we'll come to talk about that in a second, to do with Manurewa Marae and the associated integrity failures. But I was making the point that, and you do as well, that what's truly shocking, you say in your report, is that these failures are not new, to do with the public sector.
Yeah.
And then you go on to say this, which is where I'm coming from as well. They are part of a pattern of public service complacency that is coming to define governance in New Zealand. I found that almost the most important sentence in everything that you wrote editorial about Manurewa Marae, which we'll cover in a second. But
Good.
it is I not only do I agree with you, but I've seen it in my own political lifetime, the growing power of the bureaucracy in this country, and the inability, ironically, of elected officials, whether at a local or a central government level, to arrest that power.
Oh, look, there's so much to discuss there, Michael, but in the context of what we're talking about here, I think we've got a bureaucracy that is resting on its laurels of being clean, and open and working in the public interest, because that's, the state service does have a good reputation, and I think decades ago it probably did work very well and probably the best in the world. But in a sense, we believe our own myths too easily, and people rest on their laurels.
Yeah.
And things can be corrupted, they can be broken, and if you keep believing your PR, you never address those things. And New Zealand,
and that's the other thing about this. This week, I was in a council meeting for the last couple of days, so I've been watching this from afar, and I was really interested in how the mainstream media reported the so-called resignation of Stats New Zealand Chief Executive Mark Sowden in consequence of this. And I thought, he's not resigning. He hasn't been held accountable for this. He was stepping down in March anyhow, and he's allowed to. You make the same point.
Oh, look, it's the Kiwi way. We like to save face. We don't like to be too mean. We don't really believe in too much accountability in this country. And so it's a face-saving mechanism here that, oh, well, he's finishing his contract, so let's just, quietly, tidily, shuffle him out. And but I think it sends the wrong message when the government or the Public Service Commissioner allows that to happen. The Statistics New Zealand really have been found wanting. Heads need to roll, and probably more than him as well. But they just like to not rock the boat, and hope that people will think that's enough. Wow, he's fallen on his sword. He hasn't fallen on his sword. He's quietly just disappearing, and he'll be on to something. He'll move on to another job without real consequences. And so New Zealanders, I think, they actually get quite cynical about this, because we're so used to being told that everything's fine, everything's good, no corruption in New Zealand, we have the best public service in the world. And then we get these reports that show, well, actually, no, there's some big problems. But what happens? Nothing really. And
no, you're absolutely right.
I think people were quite right to believe that the BS will continue.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. And listen, all power to you and to your backers, by the way. Good on them. Listen, we have to remember what this whole investigation was about. There were a series of allegations. I think it started off with a series of whistleblowers who were working on Manurewa Marae, who alleged that data collected from the COVID-19 vaccination rollout and the census, the last census, 2023 census, may have been used, or they argued were, but may have been used for political purpose and specifically to benefit Te Pāti Māori and their political operatives. And as a consequence, these reports were made underway. I also mentioned this morning in my opening editorial, Bryce, that Te Ao Māori News are reporting, quote, that Te Pāti, quote, and I quote, Te Pāti Māori and the Marae have now been cleared of any wrongdoing. Is that true?
No. I mean, you could make an argument that there's nothing in these two reports that came out this week that will lead to any, convictions or will end up, putting anyone in jail or anything, because that's true. I mean, if you look at the Public Service Commission report, its brief wasn't to look at whether there was wrongdoing in terms of those Marae community agencies. It was only to look at the government side of things. So of course it didn't find any wrongdoing. It wasn't looking for that. The second report, which was commissioned by Statistics New Zealand, also had a fairly narrow brief, but it looked at the evidence and found that yes, probably the information was misused by those community organisations, and that it had evidence that there'd been photocopying being done, that a lot of the data wasn't being stored correctly, and that they believed that it had probably been passed on to be used for purposes that it wasn't intended to be for. So they kind of navigated it carefully. Their role wasn't to necessarily decide whether anyone's been cleared or not. We've still got a police investigation, possible involvement from the Serious Fraud Office, and now the Privacy Commissioner, and those will be the ones that will be more authoritative in deciding whether anyone's been cleared. But it'll be the court of public opinion that's ultimately the most important decider on whether there's been wrongdoing. But no one's been cleared of anything.
No, that was my understanding as well. Listen, the other thing here, though, Radio New Zealand have finally woken up and have reported as of this morning, but they've looked particularly at the health industry, the health ministry and Te Whatu Ora. And they said that not only did they not do any audits, and that now the health ministry and Te Whatu Ora admitting that, to do with Manurewa Marae and to do with the COVID, but this is something else. They said, but they had no power to do so under their toothless contracts that are now being urgently overhauled. In other words, it's very possible that even if this information was misused, and I think this is where you're leading to, by Te Pāti Māori, Manurewa Marae, and the principals involved there, the contracts were so loose anyhow and so poorly drafted that they never said that Manurewa Marae, Te Pāti Māori couldn't use that information for their personal and political purposes.
It's absolutely staggering, and I mean, there's so much that needs to be debated and investigated about this. To what extent it's just incompetency is obviously a clear, a possible answer. But of course, there's so many other dynamics going on here of networks and influence, and what you might call corruption, issues around ethnicity, which are really fraught, but they have to be discussed in this context.
Absolutely,
because of course that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
We might find that same situation occurs with other community agencies as well, and it's nothing to do with this being a Marae, nothing to do with it being a Marae organisation. And that could just be that there's incompetence in the way that state agencies contract out to any agencies. But I think there'll be a suspicion that agencies are particularly keen to bend over backwards to make sure that they're seen as allies or seen as enabling, I guess, the liberation or the progress of Te Ao Māori. And to some extent, that's understandable, isn't it? To some extent. I mean, you have to remember, of course, in this country, we've got a long history of Māori being oppressed in lots of ways, of facing inequality, and state organisations having a terrible history of the way they've dealt with them. And so they kind of now gone to the other extreme, if you like, and they've swung from treating Māori terribly to treating Māori as if they can do no wrong, or at least Māori organisations. And you kind of understand that, but it's not really the answer, is it?
No. And in fact, all it does, I would suggest, is encourage the conduct that we're looking at the moment, and not deliver the outcomes that you want to improve Māori in any of those particular areas.